Good Wednesday evening, everybody. You are watching Direct Line Live, and tonight we have our special guest, Jim Ports, who is the former Maryland Secretary of Transportation. And as always, we have Mark Unkefer, your primary host, joined tonight by special guest host, Neil Parrott, owner and engineer at Traffic Solutions, Inc. All right, y'all, take it away.
Well, welcome, and thank you, Jackie, for the handoff. Just a quick note, Neil, his day job over the years as a traffic engineer, and so we thought it made sense to make it not quite so softball for you, Jim. We'd have an expert throw the hardball questions to you, but I say that in jest. Clearly, topic number one in Maryland these days in transportation is just the tragedy of what's happened with the Key Bridge in Baltimore, on obviously the deaths, but also the interruption that has taken place as a result. It will continue to take place. Jim, just off the top of your head, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think one, as you mentioned, it's a real tragedy. One for the port,
Jim,
in and of itself, yes. One just for the port and the port workers, and two for the national economy, but three, a real problem with traffic throughout the Baltimore area. Because as you know, we had three crossings of the bay. Now we have two, and then 695. And I can tell you, after being out there today on 695, it's going to be a long haul. It's going to be a rough time traveling back and forth.
So I'm going to ask Neil. I may have to do some correction here. So Neil, why don't you take over and ask some questions about the reconstruction?
Yeah, I guess first I would like to talk about traffic. So it looks like of all the crossings, this one by far had the least number of crossings, 35,000 per day.
Correct.
So do you think the other crossings, the Beltway, the two tunnels, can just absorb that pretty easily, or is it really going to be a struggle?
No, I think it's still going to be a struggle. So you might recall not too long ago, actually, when I was MDTA executive director, we had to rebuild the viaduct on 895, which is the old harbor tunnel. Everybody calls it the old tunnel, but it's a harbor tunnel, right? And so when we did that, the traffic had to disperse on the other two crossings. And, you know, it was painful, but it had to be done because that viaduct was falling apart. I think it might be a little bit easier in one respect for the normal passenger vehicle. But Neil, the big problem with this one is the Key Bridge was the primary artery for all hazardous material supplies, right, from the port. And the reason is because they can't go through either one of the tunnels with hazardous materials, especially, cylinders, pressurized cylinders of any kind. And most people don't understand propane or something like any other gas. So all that's going to shift to 695.
That's right.
And trust me, people are not ready for the amount of trucks that are going to be on 695. Although with the port shut down, there may not be quite as much truck traffic anyway, but it's going to be painful because once they open that channel up, that's going to start all the truck traffic again.
Oh, that's true. So it might be okay now, but when this hazardous trucks get on the road and other trucks, the actual port traffic, which isn't there now.
That's right. Now I say the hazardous waste has to go on 695, but a lot of the other trucks aren't hazardous, right? So they will be taking the other tunnels, and it's gonna jam things up pretty well. Trust me.
Could you comment a little bit about the timeline as to how long this would take? And I know before the show we were talking a little bit about some of the steps that might be expedited, such as some of the reviews that typically take place.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things to consider. One, you have the recovery right now, right, and the demolition. So I do believe they have a very good company there, Skanska. They're the ones that built the nice Middleton Bridge for the Hogan administration, and they did it in record time. And they, in my opinion, are probably one of the best firms for this purpose because they have the barges and some of the largest cranes in the world. And the fact that they're here at Trade Point Atlantic and they were also working on the Bay Bridge made it very convenient for them to be selected as a sole source contractor for this purpose. So I think clearing the channel should probably occur, I'm guessing within about 4 weeks. I would have said 3 to 4, but with the weather that we've been having and the fact that we got thunderstorms with lightning, you can't have a tall crane, you can only imagine, in the middle of the bay during lightning. That's not going to happen. You got to, we want to get this recovery completed, but we don't want anybody else harmed in any way. So we got to be really careful of that. Now, then it'll move to the procurement process. It will be bid, I'm sure. And we have to determine what type of bridge that's going to be. Now, I would assume that it's going to be a cable stay bridge. And a cable stay bridge, I guess the best way to describe that is, the bridges you go across and it kind of looks like sailboats, like the cables create like a sailboat look to it. That's a cable stay bridge. And I think by doing that, they can move some of those stanchions out a little further, widen the channel, and put some kind of barrier around it to protect it. They couldn't put the type of barrier on this bridge that would try and protect it from ships today. One, because they never anticipated the size of these ships, but two, because it is a very narrow channel. And if they put the kind of barriers up that they would need, they probably wouldn't be able to get ships through that channel. And then of course it's the construction. And so it really, Mark, depends on what type of bridge and how high they go. Right now it's 185 feet. We know it should probably go higher, but to go higher, you got to go wider. And so it's going to depend on a lot of factors. And then again, you mentioned some of the other factors. So some of the environmental factors like NEPA, whether they are able to use some of the previous NEPA reviews and put it towards this. And then you got the all kind of acts as far as what is it, shoot, I'm trying to think of the name of it now. I'll think of it in a second, but it's Endangered Species Act, which is totally separate from the NEPA reviews. And so depending on that, it could take a little longer. I would hope that the Biden administration and others would try to fast track this, because we have a lot of people that are dependent on the port. And when you talk about the Endangered Species Act, if it takes too long, the endangered species is going to be the port worker. Okay. And and I don't mean to sound coy about that, but the longer we take to get that port functioning, the worse it's going to be for the Port of Baltimore, because, now I should say the Helen Diehlitz Bentley Port of Baltimore, after the bill just passed, but because all these shippers are going to go to other ports and they're going to start relying on them for a lot of things, and it's going to be hard to get them back if we don't work with them soon.
So the 4 weeks to clear the channel, would that be when they could open the port at that time?
Yeah. So obviously, you don't need a bridge to get ships back and forth, right? You need a clear channel. Now, it's also going to depend on how much of that steel went down and push some of that silt into the middle where the channel is. So they may have to do some extra dredging. I don't know, because I'm actually not part of that, right? But I do know emergency management really well. and I know the steps you need to take to mitigate a lot of emergencies. And so without knowing exactly what the Corps of Engineers is finding, and without having a crystal ball, quite frankly, I can't determine that. But I can tell you the steps it's going to take to try and do that.
And when the port's open, we talked about truck traffic, and I know there's train traffic, and they're trying to widen some of these train tracks to have double stacking. Is the construction of that going to get in the way of this as well?
No, I think the double stacking is mostly on land, right? So it's a lot of the bridges that are in and around the Baltimore area, and actually there's I think 3 in Pennsylvania, if my memory serves me correctly. And so one, they have to cut the tunnel so that the cargo can be hauled, because you got all those round tunnels, right? That's the way they used to build them all, and obviously it's for strength. But they have to cut those so that the second container can fit on top, and then they have to raise some of the bridges in like the Baltimore area, where there's a lot of traffic. They got to raise some of those bridges so that they can get under there too. So that can continue, and that would be a boon for the state. Trust me, and quite frankly, places like Western Maryland, because you could have distribution centers in Western Maryland where you could take the cargo by train to a place like Western Maryland, and from Western Maryland to the rest of the United States. I mean, it's amazing how well positioned Maryland is.
So it's really an important component to building that distribution economic development strategy, to be able to continue to have this transportation infrastructure in place and working, and obviously expanding the capacity consistent with the larger containers that are prevalent.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I was one of the ones that went down with the congressional delegation when we talked to Mr. Foote, who was in charge of CSX at the time. I mean, he still may be, I don't know, but and he was like, well, we're not going to do this anymore. We're like, no, you need to do this. This is important economic development for the state of Maryland. And we really pushed hard, and we got them to reconsider. And then, of course, we created that deal between the federal government, the state government, and CSX to make that affordable to move forward. And so that is a game changer, quite frankly, for Maryland's Port of Baltimore, as far as container distribution.
So one of the other transportation issues that's perhaps not quite as front and center as the bridge, but we are now in the final days with the legislature, and among the proposals that they're kicking around are a mix of tax and fee increases to, among other things, spending money for the Transportation Trust Fund. Any thoughts about what's the right way to handle that trust fund with sources of revenue?
So that's a dangerous one for me. But so let me say this. I was quite fascinated that they said it was a $3 billion deficit. And the reason I say I was fascinated is because, look, when I'm going through the budget process as secretary, the state legislature was not really friendly to the Hogan administration, and that's putting it lightly, right? Yeah. But I get it. I was a legislator. I understand their role, and I did the same thing with the Glenn Dunning administration, and Schaefer administration when I was there. But the point is, legislative services, or fiscal services was a part of legislative services, would never have let me get away with a projected deficit for the new administration coming in. Not a shot. Because I heard, I heard legislators, I heard the governor say that, it's a previous governor that didn't, look out for the budget. I was like, wait a minute. Not only would they not let us get away with that, but after we presented the budget, they approved it. Okay. So I was really kind of shocked that they said it was a $3 billion deficit. Now, I don't know what happened between the time we left and 2 years later, but I know that they made a lot of promises on things that they wanted to provide. And I also know that a lot of those promises they didn't have the money for, and the red line's one of them. The red line's one of them. And we did have some money set aside for FBI, but I'm not sure what the total deal is now. And they made a lot of promises to a lot of counties on things. And then, of course, they looked at the budget and all of a sudden realized they couldn't meet all those promises. And so then they said they had a deficit. But without being able to analyze it forensically, myself and look at it, I'm not sure what all the causes are. But I do know that they made a lot of promises that they probably couldn't keep.
So what you mentioned, one of the items or one of the projects that has been, how shall I say, renewed, revived. It had been killed by Governor Hogan. I think it was in the first year of his time as governor. So we're talking now over 9 years ago, which is the Red Line, which is actually a light rail transit railroad through in Baltimore. What are your thoughts about bringing that back?
Well, I think it's ill-advised. It's a political statement from the Democrats in this case. They love transit, which is fine. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a need for transit, but I think Baltimore is not able to support and sustain something like the Red Line. There's just not enough population. People are leaving. There's not enough population to sustain it, which means there's not enough ridership. And so who ends up paying for it is all of us, right? Everybody that's not using it. And it basically becomes a tax to us instead of a user fee for the user. And so I just think it's ill-advised. When I heard some of the numbers that they were throwing around, like 2 billion, 3 billion, I'm like, there's not a shot in this world, especially if they do a tunnel. There's no way they're going to get away with $2 or $3 billion for that project. Now, if they do everything raised, maybe they could save a lot of money by doing that. I think they're going to get a lot of political fallback from that because a lot of businesses and people don't want the raised line. But there's ways you could do it to be a little cheaper. But I tell you, I think there are better solutions, and I can tell you one right now. I said if you want to create and I told the administration this, if you want to create an east-west corridor, take a street like Baltimore Street. It's one way right now. Make it two-way, bus only. Bus, bike, and pedestrian only. That way you could take the buses off of Pratt, off of Lombard. You could run a service and give them signal priority, and you can run that service east and west all day long, very quickly and efficiently. And and I think it would work. And I think if it works, you can go about 6 blocks up or 8 blocks up and do the same thing, and you could cover nearly the whole city, east and west, with two roads that would take you back and forth on a bus. And then of course you could do it north-south too. Again, if you're doing them about 4 blocks apart, or I'm sorry, 6 blocks apart, you're only walking 2 or 3 blocks every time you get off a line, and it would cover most of the city. It'd be efficient, it'd be cheap, And the good thing about buses, you can change the route. A rail line, you cannot change that route. Once you lay the tracks, you're done. You can add tracks and do some changes with it, but you can't. It's not like you can pick them up and move them if it changes. And quite frankly, we all know that with economic development, things change. Companies come, companies go. GM is a perfect example. GM's gone, but now we have Amazon. So I mean, different companies need have different needs, and you need to be able to shift those resources accordingly. You can't do it with rail. And so I think we could do those bus lanes on those streets a whole lot cheaper and way faster than that red line would take to build.
Well, and Jim, you could also do a bus rapid transit, so kind of like light rail. You'd have
exactly what I'm talking about.
Easy off.
Yeah. By giving them signal priority, by giving them a road with no vehicles on it, where they can just fly by and do their pickups. It is basically a bus rapid transit concept, like you said, and it's look, when people are looking for transit, they want a few things. They want it to be efficient. They want it to be safe. And they want it to be cost effective. And now the cost effective is already there, but the efficiency is not. And of course, the safety is not at this point. And even though we've got a good record for safety in most cases, a lot of people, especially now, are very fearful about going into the city.
Speaking of that project, I am thankful for Governor Hogan stopping that red line project and only doing the purple line. Even just the purple line has doubled in cost. I mean, nobody would have anticipated that. Although looking at the red line with that large tunnel, it was like 1.5 miles.
Yeah.
Once you go underground, you just don't know what you're going to get.
Well, actually you do. And unfortunately, a lot of the city is fill down towards the harbor. And a lot of that fill is coker, which is very volatile, especially when it gets wet and it heaves up. We had a lot of it down at the port. There's a lot of it down at Turner Station. It was done by Honeywell. And I tell you, that's a big secret, because it's my understanding that the O'Malley administration knew about that and told everybody not to say anything, because the state taxpayers, they would go, oh, look what we found. And then the state taxpayers would have been on the hook for all that. And, we didn't really go public with that, but it's unfortunate that there are certain things we know that would escalate that price. Now, the purple line, a big part of the purple line, and Pete Brown said this a long time ago, the courts and the legislature stopped that project. And that cost us hundreds of millions of dollars, because you're paying delay cost to the developers, and the court had no business stopping that project, none whatsoever. And for the state legislature to try and stop that project like they did, and think about this, Neil, you were down there. The Democrats are all for transit,
right?
But they were the ones stopping the project from moving forward. What sense does that make? It's not much different than when Ehrlich was in and Ehrlich was trying to get horse racing betting and stuff like that, and they stopped that, and then turn around and did it when O'Malley was in. We as legislators at that time, we need to do what's best for the public and stop the political gamesmanship. We're too close to DC, and we're starting to act like DC, and there's no place for that right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of projects that got stopped, Governor Hogan and you were very, very close to getting I-270 and I-495 going. I mean, you were, I think, like a month away from getting it signed. And then, of course, Governor Westmore came in and just completely stopped that project. What are your thoughts on that project now? I mean, it still needs to happen.
Well, yeah. Everybody knows it needs to happen. The American Legion Bridge
Yeah.
has to be widened. It's a showstopper, right? It's terrible. Um, it's it's one of the worst areas traffic wise, that whole 495 and across DC and into Virginia. Um, Look, people were screaming about the amount of traffic they have to sit in each and every day. And if you've ever done that, I mean, thank goodness I don't have to do that. But when I did, I hated every minute of it. Governor Ehrlich put the ICC in.
Mm-hmm.
I was part of that administration when we did that too. That was not so popular to some, but that helped relieve some of the 495 problems. But it's not an end all for that situation. That area needs to be widened, and there's no two ways about it. Now, again, it's the Democrats that stopped that project and stalled it. As a matter of fact, that 270 where we started the ramp metering and all that kind of stuff to try and smooth some of that out, it's really working well, and it has saved some time.
Yeah, it has.
And they were all against that too. Pete Ryan was, I have to be honest with you, Pete Ryan was one of the best things ever happened in this state.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say that until I'm not here anymore. He did a great job. They hated his guts. But he did a fantastic job for this state. And 270 is one of those. And he was the one that recognized that so many places we go from 3 lanes to 2 or 2 lanes to 1. And he's like, why do you people build roads like this? This was his comment to me. I said, Pete, I have no idea. I wasn't around then when they did. I was probably in high school or maybe not even there yet. But, we tried to widen a lot of things like 32, 70. We were trying to widen 15. And they were trying to stop us every step of the way when we were trying to do this. Now, after it's done, everybody loves it. Same with 404. They call that the road to nowhere. I'm like, what? It's one of the major arteries to Ocean City. It helps take some traffic off the other areas, like 50. And so, I mean, he did a great job. He recognized that we needed to do something differently down there. The best way to do it was tolls, because there's not enough money in the TTF or Transportation Trust Fund to fund all these major projects. As you recognize, the prices are going sky high, and you just can't pay your way out of trying to do that. You need some help, and tolls is a good way to do it because it's a user fee. If you don't use it, it's not a tax. If you don't use it, you don't pay. If you use it, you pay. It's as simple as that.
So we've talked about this in the past. Obviously, one of the points of resistance has been the idea of high occupancy vehicle tolls for the Beltway piece. You've had some personal experience in bringing a project online. It's not as though we don't have those in Maryland. We don't have them on down in the Washington area, but you were very instrumental in bringing it to Baltimore.
Yeah, yes, I was.
What's the reaction now? I see a lot of people when I'm up there on them, so there must be some popularity.
So Mark, this is one of those projects that I said I still have the arrows, from the press. You may have heard the press call them Lexus lanes and all this other stuff, and I took a lot of bullets in that. I said they're not going to kill me. They're not going to kill me with a gunshot wound. I'm just going to die of lead poisoning from so much lead, right? It was an accumulation effect. But I say that jokingly, but the press was absolutely brutal to us when we wanted to do that. Now, as I described it, I said this to Bob Ehrlich a few weeks ago. I said, man, one of the greatest things you ever did was let us do the express toll lanes. I said, that's my ICC, my intercounty connector. It connects Baltimore City through Baltimore County to Hartford County. That's my ICC. And I'm going to tell you something. All the crap that we took from the press and from the Democrats and whomever, I guarantee if you try to take those away right now, you get run out of town. I guarantee it. As a matter of fact, it's funny because O'Malley tried to stop him, but he, we had already had the projects moving before he got there. And he did stop certain parts, which we also reenacted, by the way. But Hartford County was begging us to continue those up into Hartford County, because once you got past White Marsh, that White Marsh exit, that's when all the crashes started because everything was coming together. And that's when all the traffic started. As soon as you hit after White Marsh, you were sitting in a parking lot again. And I tell you, I took the tunnels every day to work. I worked for Baltimore Gas Electric at the time. I took the tunnels every day. And I'm telling you, that part of 95, before we put express toll lanes in, was a parking lot in the morning and a parking lot in the afternoon. And once we put those express toll lanes in, it was free flowing in the free lanes as well as the toll lanes. They work. And that's why during the Hogan administration, we started that again because I loved it so much. And they're gonna finish that project, the one part pretty soon, and then final I think is in 27. So again, Hartford County was begging for them, and they're going to get them, and they're very, very happy that they are getting them.
Well, thanks for doing that. That's a big deal, and I just wish we got it in Western Maryland too.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge, and I'll tell you, Neil, I can't stress enough that how much traffic that takes off the free lanes, and the free lanes flow better. And I give the analogy like this: when school's in, traffic's tough. When school stops, it's like this relief, right? It's only about 10% of the traffic. That's all you need. And that's about 10 or 15% of the traffic is what uses the express toll lanes. It's like school stopping, and you get that relief. But it's all year long. It's the analogy I use all the time.
I like it. Well, and Virginia's had huge success on 495.
Oh my goodness, yes. Well, and quite frankly, the Democrats when we first got there in the Hogan administration, they were yelling at us like, "Why don't you do more like Virginia?" And then when we tried to, they stopped us.
That doesn't even make sense. Virginia, at least when they started these ETLs, the Democrat was in charge as the governor. It was before Youngkin.
That's right.
So they liked that in Virginia. I wonder what the disconnect is. Why do the Democrats in Maryland dislike it so much?
They want everybody on transit.
Right.
They want everybody on the metro system, and they want to push them. And I can tell you, a lot of their planners down in Montgomery County, Prince George's County, they were convinced that you have to make the traffic so bad,
right,
so that people would switch. I'm telling you, that doesn't work. You can make it as bad as you want. They're still staying in their cars, but now they're mad. And
well,
I-270
every morning, every night.
No reason for it. None whatsoever.
So if Governor Hogan wins as the U.S. Senate candidate and I win as a House, could we do this at the federal level without even messing with Maryland?
Do what?
Could we institute, say this is kind of a national road, I-495, and introduce express toll lanes?
Well, I mean, it is a part of the federal interstate.
Right.
So, I mean, so 495, 95, they're all part, 695, they're all part of the federal interstate. But what the feds do is they let the states kind of run it, but we have to follow all their rules, of course. And anytime you do something with the interchange, you got to get the federal blessing, before you do it and stuff like that. So any work you do on the interstate, you have to get their blessing, except for toll lanes. So like parts of 95 that are tolled, the toll facility, MDTA, can do that without a lot of federal blessing, except when they put a new interchange in. They still gotta work with the feds.
Neil, I think you'd have to come up with some carrots. I don't know that you'd have a stick to be able to accomplish that. So if you could incent that. But I'm struck with the comparison with Virginia, because that's going to be a challenge coming across the American Legion Bridge, because
Right.
the Virginia side has really moved forward with
Yep.
a lot of upgrades. Also, express lanes practically to the bridge. It hasn't quite reached that point yet,
Right.
but it's on its way. And so that's going to, I think, create a real bottleneck. And I will tell you, Virginians, I in transportation spent a lot of time with Democrats from Virginia who look at Maryland, and they're kind of surprised, to say the least. They're also ready to build a second crossing, but we don't go there.
That would be second crossing would be bad for BWI, I can assure you. Very bad.
Would be bad for the airport.
Oh yeah.
But
Because a
you're
lot
saying
more
they
people.
just go straight to Dulles.
Exactly. It'd
Right.
be a quicker way to Dulles and Reagan. Yep.
So the American Legion Bridge looks like it opened 1962, so it's kind of old. When would they need to replace it anyway?
So most bridges, great question. Most bridges are built to the 50-year spec. So you do the math. It's ready.
It's ready.
As a matter of fact, they're going to have to do something within the next 10 years. Have to. Or they're going to have a real devastation in that area. That bridge is, I think it's still in fair condition, but it's needing a lot of work. Let's just say that. Needs a lot of work to keep it in fair condition.
Well, maybe that's the carrot, Mark, is we'll
Right.
fix the bridge at the national level, but you're going to have to put some express toll lanes in Maryland.
Yeah. I mean, there was talk about replacing that bridge through, other means, and it could be done. It could be done. It's interesting because the feds don't want to do the tolls, of course, but you could replace that bridge through other means if you had the money. And Maryland doesn't have the money to do that. I can assure you.
So let me just come back. What are you? We're coming towards the end of the show. Neil, we know what you're up to these days, but Jim, and we'll give you a chance there. But Jim, so what have you been up to these days? What are you looking to promote?
So I was actually fully retired and loving life. I live on an 8-acre farm, and
Nice.
I'm out here fixing fences and gardening and just loving life. And Bob Castley, who is a friend of mine, a county executive, asked me to come in and talk to him, and I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll come in and talk to you." And then all of a sudden, we were talking about a lot of issues, and all of a sudden he said, "Hey, would you come on board with me?" And I said, "Not a shot. I like retirement, and I'm really enjoying myself, and I don't want to do anything full time." And then I wasn't trying to qualify it. It's just that's just how I said it. And he said, "Well, would you consider part time?" I said, "Haven't really thought about it. Wasn't really looking for anything." I said, but if something came along where I was, I could pick the days, pick the hours that didn't work any more than 20 in a week, and I mean strictly didn't work any more than 20 in a week, I might consider it. But I, I'm not looking for anything. He said, "Done." And I went, "What just happened?" And I looked at him, I was like, what do you mean done? And But as I said, Bob's a friend. I helped him get elected to begin with, and I do want to see him succeed. I live in Harford County. I want to see the county do well, and he needs some help. And so I said, I'll come and help you, but I'm telling you, I'm strict about the 20 hours a week. I'll probably do more in 20 than most people do in 2 weeks, but because I know where to look, I know who to call, and that's really what it's about. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm helping them out a little bit, but then the rest of the week I'm out here on my farm, loving life, getting eggs from the chickens and stuff.
Sounds good. And I'll give you, Neil, a chance. You've been pretty busy these last couple of months as well, right?
I have been a little busy. We decided to run again for U.S. Congress. So February 8th, the last day that you could join in, I signed up. I made the decision. I talked to Chris Schenk. You know Chris, Jim. Yeah, so I talked to him around 10:30 in the morning. And then around 11, so I already made my mind up. I'm going to do it after talking to Chris. But then around 11:30, I realized, wait a minute, what's this? Larry Hogan's running for U.S. Senate. I was so excited. What that means is if he wins that primary, millions of dollars is going to pour into Maryland, getting forward the conservative message. It's going to help him, going to help me. We can take both these seats. I'm really excited. And, of course, I got a text from Chris later on. Sorry, Neil, I couldn't tell you while we were talking. I was sworn to secrecy. So I guess I was telling him my poll. I said, hey, Chris, I did a poll where if Larry Hogan runs for president, he's going to have basically 62% of the vote in District 6. And Chris entertained me and listened, but he knew they had their own polls and they were doing something totally different than that.
Yeah. I was talking to Chris today, believe it or not.
Oh, good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you very much. We really enjoyed this. We will wait and see what they come up with as a revenue package for transportation, and we'll have an opportunity to pick through that in the future. But Jim and Neil, thank you for joining us.
Sure, my pleasure. Anytime.
Right.